Hello and welcome to Her Matters. I am your host. My name is Chioma Omero.
Culture of silence. Again, silence, because if you even try to say, oh, he did this to me, she did this to me, people then say, where's your proof? Are you sure?
Now, what I've seen is parents are not talking to their daughters and their sons. They are not talking to them. So when
people now think that if someone in the medical profession or in healthcare or in that field carries out the process, it would be safer.
The other part of it is the way we structured our healthcare system to actually selectively, remove these paid medicine vendors out of the entire health loop. We don't officially recognize them, but there's a significant role they have to play.
Welcome back to the second part of this extended episode on Her Matters. And with me on this part, we're going to be talking to Mr. Abiola Oshunniyi, a technology and innovation expert, right?
Yeah, thank you.
A consultant.
Consultant.
There we go. Expert consultant. Hey,
They all work in the
you
same
know something
field.
about that.
Absolutely.
Same field, exactly.
Yeah.
So happy to have you on the show.
Thank you
and
very
you are
much.
the first man on Her Matters. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely delighted, actually. Absolutely delighted, yeah.
Good to have you.
Thank you very
much. So
much.
I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in. Now I want you to talk to us about your line of work, what you do, and just talk to us about that for a minute.
So interestingly, I work at an intersection of healthcare that is very unique. So I work around, public health, private, and international development. And this gives me visibility into things around healthcare sustainability, policy, healthcare program design, implementation, evaluation, and actually how to actually apply specific user approaches into healthcare. For instance, technology that I've done some work for the past 15 years around, thinking around from point of service care. So think when you're talking about adherence to usage of commodities or drugs, or for reminder messages for women to come back to the healthcare facility to receive care, all the way to health insurance digitization and the digitization of the entire healthcare system, where a governor can sit directly on his desk and see what exactly is happening from the budgeting perspective to a revenue perspective, and evaluating how the policy that they've made for healthcare is actually improving lives of healthcare. So that's been my spectrum for the last, say, plus 2 decades.
Okay, so let's talk family planning. Is the health sector?
Absolutely,
your
yes.
sector?
Yes.
I know that there are high rates of births in this country, very high rates of births in Nigeria. We also want a high level of poverty in Nigeria. People are reluctant to consider family planning.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the factors that contribute to people's reluctance to adhere to family planning? Even take the course or talk about it, or let's start with even talking about
the conversation of
so
family
what do you
planning.
think are some of those factors that affect that?
So literature already establishes, I just want to establish a bit of background, and research has established there's a direct connection between family planning adoption and the rate of poverty in a society. Because when you begin to think about overpopulation, you begin to think around conversations around how do you manage resources, even from a family standpoint. Let's bring it from a small unitary standpoint of society, the family. So if I had, let me use direct numbers, I earn say $1,000 a month, which is roughly, based off our NAFEX rate today, roughly about 450,000 naira a month. You would probably be one of the well-off families, right? Because you can afford a few things. You can send your kids to private school.
Pay your bills.
You can pay your bills. Of course, there's significant amount of inflation that's here right now, but you can get by. The question is, when you have 2 kids, and when you have 6 kids, getting by, the question of getting by becomes different.
Gets a little tighter and tighter.
A lot tighter. So you think about the cost of the fees. You think about the cost of the food that they eat. You think about even your utility cost actually goes up, because when you think about the amount of water you would use for 4 people, as against the amount of water you use for 6 people, the cost of utility literally goes up. So there's a differential to, when you're looking at a family that is smaller, or managed based off of resources, and when a family is larger. So, of course, traditionally, connecting to your question directly, traditionally, being a patriarchal African society where the number of kids was a show of wealth, we still have a subtle subconscious dimension as the number of kids as a show of wealth. Of course, there's been a change in dynamics around that, and you would understand that to change culture takes a bit of time, but the truth about it is that there's still that fundamental aspect where people look at it as one issue of wealth. Of course, because we're also a very somewhat religious society, a society that believes in God and that children are somewhat a gift
and
from
treasure
God.
and wealth.
And wealth from God, but there's the also aspect of you need to cater for that wealth and gift of God. You need to actually, manage that. So that's where the conversation around family planning also plays a very key role. Also, I've spoken a bit about tradition and religion. There's also the conversation, which is key. And I remember a while back that I met a professor of medicine, and we're talking around this concept of minimal adoption or, the optimal adoption of family planning in certain sections of society. And it made me understand a conversation around parity. Parity is when the number of children a woman has had, and then you now begin to ask the question of how many live births she actually has. So when a woman gives birth, it's different from how many living children she has. So you might have people that have given birth 9 times, but they have only 2 living children. So when you talk family planning to such a woman, there's a question you need to. So there are contextual, nuances to the conversation around family planning. So when you look at, the concept of women that are actually trying to have children too, there's a possibilities of where you have missed pregnancies or missed opportunities for them to actually have full births, right? So if you're talking family planning to a woman that is trying to conceive, now it's a little difficult. So you have multiple dynamics when you're thinking about, why people are not adopting family planning. But for a more broader context, right? Family planning speaks to the concept of social responsibility of actually creating national prosperity. And we have not positioned that conversation that way. We've positioned it as more of a population management strategy, not as a wealth management strategy for the continent and for Nigeria, really. So people don't see it as, if I can manage the size of my family, I can manage the prosperity of the nation, because there's that resource, mobilization, resource gap that we have, even from the family front, like we talked about earlier. Yeah. So there's that part of not having enough understanding as family planning as a wealth management strategy in itself. So of course there's the religious, there's the traditional cultural bias that we have, there's the limited awareness, of course, of family planning in itself within the population. Then we now go further. The question of availability of commodities is also another thing, and access to family planning. When we speak about healthcare, there are 3 things that we're always looking at: affordability, availability, and accessibility. Now, of all these 3, you look at it that how often can I walk into a public health facility, or in this case, a private health care facility, to actually get family planning services. So as of today, under the National Health Act, or under the National Health Insurance or any health insurance policy except probably private health insurance policy, you find out that the only thing that is available in many cases is family planning counseling.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So it's free, right? But the other aspects of it, when you begin to talk about, the family planning different options, some have to be paid. And for certain people that actually live below the $2 range,
that is not even
an option. It's not something that they want to go out of pocket for. As of today, you already know that 70% of expenditure for healthcare is actually out of pocket. So if I'm going to add family planning to, me just being well, there's also a question of, would I rather not buy food rather than pay for family planning in my daily, to feed my children today? Why take a family planning option? I remember something that, and this is an interesting nuance that is also there, and that speaks to our social context that is also very interesting. I remember while I was doing some work sometime in 2010, 2011, and I was working on a community project, real community project, and when I mean community, both riverine,
deep community
projects where accessibility is a thing, and the community was primarily agrarian, right? So many times when we do family planning policies, we are looking at them from an egalitarian city, point of view.
Urbanish,
You don't look at them. Yeah, very urban, elitist style. Those policies do not reflect the contextual realities of other aspects of society. And what do I mean by that? Now, the only recreation these people have, literally, is intercourse and probably their palm wine.
Here we go again with that word, and I'm going to, I call it a different name. People say intercourse, I just say the horizontal tangle, but let's go back.
That's literally what they have, right? So, of course, they play their draft and all of that, but how much more? So, think of farming season, after farming season. Then, of course, there is a lot of festivals that go on. There's still the access to contraceptives, which is also what we're talking about here. So at the end of the day, you find out that there's a bulge in population at specific times of the year based off of the season, festivities, festivals, cold and warm seasons. Like, of course,
weather for one versus weather for two.
Weather for two, So those are things that literally play out in our context. And many times, as much as we know those dynamics, we sometimes do not reflect those dynamics in policy and how we bring people to understand them. So I very much say that it's a multi-layered, how would I put it, hindrance to saying why are people not actually, and for a person, I'll tell you that for just one person, there might be more than one reason. Right. There's the aspect of how do you get your spouse to even agree. There's also that concept. I remember a small survey I did. I discovered that you find out that the women within the lower class, what we call lower economic class, may actually have more decision-making capacity. Yeah, than the women in the middle class. And I would explain why. Now, the woman in the middle class actually does a lot of dependency on her spouse. Right. The woman in the lower class has a bit of economic power. She's earning. She understands the dynamics of money, right? Without the support of the woman in the middle class, based on how our society is drafted, the husband probably pays the rent, he pays partly the school fees. So she's being supplemented, she's being subsidized, her beauty, her travel, and that's why if you even go into things like abuse, you find out that you may be shocked if you do a proper survey, and that research I did.
The ones that are staying, yes, because they're dependent.
Exactly.
On the abusers.
On the abusers.
Yes,
so you find out that middle class, what we call the middle class, they might actually have more of that than even the lower class, because the woman knows how to get a simple LACPO SIP microfinance loan. And she's able to turn that money around with her business. She already understands that her husband is not catering for her. She has to take care of her kids. So she already has a posture that she has taken a decision, right, and she has taken a decision. And she has a support system from our group, our cooperative group, our fellow market women group. So they already have a way of communicating. However, the middle class woman may actually keep many of these things to herself and not be able to interact about it. I was once at a clinic with my wife during one of our visits for kids, and I discovered that many of the women that were actually at the clinic, just listening to them, did not know so much as simple as family planning. And these are people that were from Ernst & Young, KPMG, because information
supposedly exposed and enlightened.
Yeah. Wow. So information sometimes is not accessible to people. People are sometimes afraid to actually reach out and ask the right questions. So there's also that aspect of access to information and awareness around family planning.
That a National Library of Medicine article puts healthcare access in Nigeria at 43%. Why do you think this number is so low, one? And how do you see technology contributing to the change of these numbers?
So like I rightly said first, we do have a population growth that actually hovers between 2.5 and 3% annually. I always question our national population statistics on what we have, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why I question it. Between 2007 and 2010, I worked with, supported a Rotary program based off of the numbers of supported immunizations that they did. And based off of global statistics, you say that when you immunize ages 0 to 5, you're immunizing 1/5 of the population of the country. Based off of that data, they already immunized over 50 million people. So ask the question of where do we get 208,000. So it's still questionable for me, right?
Right.
So let's accept the statistics as 208, right? Now, the question of us having access to healthcare will speak to the idea of what do we even budget for healthcare? Our budgetary allocation for healthcare. As of today, there's something we call the Abuja Accord. The Abuja Accord was signed that 15% of national budget recommended, was agreed across Africa that African countries should budget 15% of their national health budget to healthcare. Why is this very important? Because of course we have unconsciously, systematically neglected health because we saw it as a social service, and because of that lack of investment and the fact that we were more donor dependent in the healthcare system, we had significant gaps. So I give you an interesting number. As of today, investment, or what you would call the finances around healthcare between 2020 and 2021 was roughly about $12 billion. And of that $12 billion, only about, say, roughly $1 to $2 billion was actually from international development. So it tells you that it's not as if there is so much big money that comes from the international development. The rest of the money comes from out-of-pocket expenditure that we spend, that people go, and some of these monies actually go to what you call your patent medicine vendors today. Because every time you have the average headache or you want to buy, you just go to your patent medicine vendor. The other part of it is the way we've structured our healthcare system to actually selectively, remove these patent medicine vendors out of the entire health loop. We don't officially recognize them, but there's a significant role they have to play. So that's just by the way of digressing. So going back to our budgeting system, 15%. As of today, there are only a few African nations that have actually reached up to the 15% mark of investment. Many would do 5%. Today, we as a country in Nigeria, we do roughly between 5%. Sometimes we've gotten to 7%, but we always don't go above that range. And if you now go statewide, because health is on the concurrent list, states are supposed to also budget for healthcare. States sometimes don't budget as high as 10% for healthcare. So when 10%? 10% of their total budget for healthcare. So it then means that if we...
Wait, somebody's making this decision though?
Yes, people are making the decision. So the question about... And I keep saying this, and that's where my work process, my advisory capability comes to play, or capacity comes to play, is that many times you find out that even the healthcare workers, the healthcare administrators are not able to convincingly present the case of healthcare as one, not just as a social service, but as a potential revenue generating service to the governor. So, and to the state. So it would never want to budget, significant amount of money to something that does not generate revenue. And we can do the maths and do the numbers. As of today, apart from VC investments into fintech, the next level of investments that we've seen in the last 24 to 48 months has actually been in health tech, followed by agri-tech. It tells you there's potential money spinners there. So first of all, we need to first unbundle and see ourselves and say healthcare is actually a potential business. Government should just focus on creating a level playing field and allow people to play extensively in it. They should just focus on policy and then remove themselves from trying to provide all of the healthcare service, but it should be a collaboration. But more importantly is the fact that how do we increase more budgetary allocations that would facilitate healthcare, service delivery where we are. Today, we probably have about over 40,000 primary healthcare facilities. That's significant infrastructure. Some of them may not be fully functional. Thank God today we have the National Health Act from the Consolidated Revenue Fund account that says there's going to be money allocated to things like the health insurance.
That says there's going to be.
Yes, so that's already, so that we've had already the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, which actually is funded from that particular place. So that's fantastic for the government. We also have things like the National Health Insurance, recently passed to become an authority, which is great, which basically remodifies the health insurance framework and then then allows for more contribution into the healthcare scheme. All right. So now going beyond budgetary, we need to then look for a better way of managing healthcare investment. So private sector contribution into healthcare, valorizing healthcare in such a way that I, as someone that would have looked at healthcare on the stock exchange, for instance, I can put my money there and say that I'm actually investing in healthcare. Foreign direct investment from companies that will be able to actually put their money, invest in healthcare and say, this is a viable market. Just like you said, you rightly said, and I mentioned, since the size of the market is there, and there's a gap,
right?
So there's a potential supply, there's a potential demand,
yes.
right? If the price is right, it means that the supplier will make money, and the person paying for it will be ready to pay with the quality of care. So, how do we, I think the question will be more, how do we change the dimension of what, so that's the issue of access that we have there. So we will not have enough people access healthcare because unconsciously or unfortunately, the way we've positioned healthcare first is as a social service. So it's when government has money or we get money from international development that we provide some services. Healthcare is still supposed to be seen as free. Really, we need to change that mindset that quality healthcare costs money. Health insurance actually just tries to manage the concept of pulling funds together from the rich and allowing the poor to have access to
just a little bit
at least to that point. But we should then create some form of economic capability around health that helps you valorize health enough that those that can pay for it, right? So I use the example of the COVID. COVID vaccines were given for free, and it was, you can see how the system went. But do you know that at the beginning, if they had said certain people of socioeconomic class to actually get the vaccine, I will tell you that people will pay for it, and that would have been a revenue spinner. So you can also see how much revenue was generated just from the testing, right? It tells you, right? Of course, you and I know that it was not the lower than middle class that was doing the testing and traveling, right? So it was the people that had the economic capabilities, and that was billions generated just from testing. So just look at it from the subsectors of subsection or sub-services of health, how much potential that healthcare has. So the moment we are able to unbundle it, we will be able to address the issue of access, address the issue of affordability.
Right.
Think about what happens with telecoms. Initially, the SIM card was as high as 25,000. 50,000 at the beginning. Mobile phones were as high as 100,000. Today you see mobile phones of $100, $50, and that's exactly how it is. So competition will create innovation, and it begins to become a consumer market. The price will drive down. The scale, the sheer size of the market allows everybody to profit from the market. So that's something we need to look at appropriately.
Good. So how would you say technology adds to access, or how it helps in people's access to family planning, and how does it help in national development?
So the short answer to that is technology is an enabler.
Right.
Yeah, and technology is able to enable, at least from first a standpoint, data visibility, and that's probably one of the biggest problems we have. When you think about national development, as of today, we don't know how many children are born every single day in Nigeria.
No, we don't.
So if I do have an idea of how many children are born, it then means that I can actually plan in terms of budgetary allocations.
Okay.
And that's so resource allocations, resource redirection as regarding that. So that's very key. We need to leverage technology, and we have multiple technology platforms or innovations that already do that for us that we just need to embrace. That can help us do inventory management, forecasting, a lot of machine learning into how do we manage, plan, and put certain infrastructure in place. That's on one side. With respect to family planning, today we see that technology has created multiple channels for us to create communications and interactions. Today, I can probably create a tweet and it become viral where 100 million people across the world can actually see that tweet. Yeah. So the same way we've leveraged the tweet to do social media luxury lifestyle processes, we can actually use
for information.
For information sharing. And so I'll give you a typical example. Till today, SMS and email still be at two biggest forms of interactions. Yeah. So as early as in 2010, I did a simple pilot survey on peer education with SMS, and the SMS reached over 10,000 young individuals.
Wow.
So it means that we do
These
have
text like
just
this.
simple text.
Just this text.
Just text.
Wow.
So, and it was basically blast SMS. I had their numbers. I was actually doing programs in secondary school back then. So I had their numbers and their, parents' numbers. And it was simple. It was a two-way text. So it was a peer education session. I just asked you a few questions. You answer those questions by saying yes, no, yes, no. It was automated. When it comes back, it gives you another set of questions. So, and that was as far back as 2010. Now we've significantly advanced to where we can create mobile apps, we can create websites, we can create learning management systems. So we can basically create, multiple channels. Today we have polls on almost every social media. Yeah, so we can create multiple interactions, and there are quite a number of, I've seen quite a number of solutions where technology is enabling that process. We just need to be more open-minded about it and, integrate it into our program strategy, because we've moved from what we used to know as the millennial strategy or the old school strategy to more
Things
Gen
have
Z
changed,
and
yes.
Gen, I don't want to know.
Gen Z 2.0.
Exactly.
Yes,
There's Gen everything.
Yeah.
So the world has literally changed. How we would communicate, the nuances of communication. Why not, a superstar doing a movie and tweeting about the movie that speaks to, family planning.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a theme.
That's a theme, and it will
There's
work.
so many ways.
Imagine, and this is, imagine yourself or collaborate with someone like a Mo Abudu and you do a full-fledged movie that is literally focused around family planning. It's not something people look at as, but you just need to craft a message. The way we've crafted messages around, issues of prostitution, the way we've crafted messages around issues of gender-based violence, we can actually craft messages especially for this new age, because literally, I can say we have an epidemic waiting to happen with the way the information gap that the young people have. People use contraceptives wrongly, or people are just literally doping themselves, on contraceptives, not knowing precautions, not knowing implications. That's an epidemic waiting to happen in itself. So we need to basically understand that part and say, it doesn't mean that because I'm not having sexual interaction, I'm not complete as a young person. That's also a place of self-esteem. That's a concept of choice. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. So there are so many nuances.
So it seems like there's so much to teach everybody on. Like we all need to relearn and unlearn and extra learn some things when it comes to the group. Because even like you're saying about just enriching yourself in your mind, telling yourself that you can be more than just maybe somebody, or you are more than a body that somebody's going to sleep with. You see yourself as more than that, and then you see that even this thing that is your sexuality is jewels to you. So you should keep it safe, and you should value it as opposed to just give it to the highest bidder or even no bidder at all.
No bidder at all.
Some people are just giving it away. So in another report from the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, CABRI, it notes that Africa's 5.1% per capita spending for health is lower than that of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. That's an organization of major European countries sharing ideas for economic growth, because their number stands at about 21.5%. But the actual proportion of the budget in Africa is way higher. So the suggestion is that management is the reason why, I guess, one is not going where it's supposed to go. So can you please?
So I give an example. So I start from the way our budgetary allocation is made in healthcare. So we do have a zero kind of budget. So a new government comes in, you start from zero budget. So the question is, what has been invested prior to that time? How do you calibrate additional investments there? So you don't do a zero budget. That's one first thing. The other part is because of the way of our polity, the intersection of our politics and our governance structure. If a new party comes in the government, they want to quickly, rubbish what was done by the previous administration, which actually has some investment parts to it. And I quickly say that government is a continuum. Politics might change. The political party might change, but government in itself is a continuum. So regardless of who is sitting on that seat, how we manage our investment in infrastructure, specifically focusing on development, is the same. So when we break that circle, what we do is we basically break our development circle, and that's where the problem really is. So for when I was speaking about the 15% budgetary allocation into healthcare, it's just like what we do with infrastructure. Today, we may not be providing as much power on the grid as you may, say nationally we are providing. But if you begin to aggregate the power sources from your generators, from your individual solar panels, if you then look at the inverters, the cumulative power that we're generating as a people, is probably more than what you would think that we need as a nation. So the question is, how do we manage all those smaller moving pieces and make it all come together? So there's this concept of integrated process of management of funds, especially within healthcare. So first you need to harmonize all the programs and have visibility into it. So the other part of it is, a lot, and this is somewhat ongoing, where you see, different development partners are bringing money into the country and they are literally spending money based off of their own priorities. Now, okay, you need to bring all of these monies into one bucket and everybody sees what that money is actually meant for. So you don't have duplication, which was also a big problem that we're having. Then you also then are able to appropriately administer the resources to where the gaps are. Now, not necessarily equally, but based off of equity, need-based, right? Not just that we're just saying everybody's going to get $1 million each, right? It should be like, what does your $1 million do for you?
That might be a good thing to say. I'm joking.
What does everybody get? Why do you get that amount of money? Of course, we can start with the idea of having, an equal share to get people up, but beyond that point, based off of performance, based off of requirements, then you're able to do that. But more importantly is the aspect of, and this is something that is somewhat new that we've not been able to explore very well as a people, is the concept of, the informal sector and the private sector actually playing a significant role in contributing to the overall healthcare system and healthcare funds management. Because everybody somewhat buys from healthcare, because healthcare is literally health is wealth. So how do we get the private sector more involved in it? So today, I work also as an intersection around sustainability within the financial services space. And I know that based off of the law, 2% of your total revenue should be dedicated to CSR, right? So when I put 2% of my money to CSR and I decide that just 10% of that 2% will be invested in health, think about all the banks that have been declaring wonderful bonuses of $200 billion, $500 billion, and think about the 2% of that money and think about the need. We did a project with a state once, and we said about 50 million naira just needs to put a primary healthcare facility at optimally functional state, fully. Everything is working, everything is wonderful. They can even do some surgeries. They can take, wonderful amount of deliveries in those facilities. So look at it, 50 million multiplied by, say 40,000 healthcare facilities across the country. And then we start scaling to other facilities. But note, primary healthcare is the closest to everybody. Our adjunct PPMV is the closest to everybody. So how do we then create a value system where everybody's connected and everybody's
getting something, everybody's matter of fact, forced sharing. You know how they as children we're meant to they're taught how to share. We should share.
So within that sustainability framework of shared value, all of us are thinking of it as, health is a commonwealth. Healthcare resources is a commonwealth. Yeah, so as much as it's a right, so it becomes a commonwealth. How do we ensure that we build a nation with a formidable, resilient healthcare system that is strong enough that if for every dollar I know the number of people that we literally are saving and are preventing from death, because many of the deaths that we have today are literally preventable, be it neonatal, be it maternal, even where we say as communicable diseases, many of it are actually very preventable. So if we put the right things in place, we would actually be able to manage what we call today our commonwealth. as health in Nigeria.
So I wanted to end on this note. We've been talking about development, we've been talking about family planning, we've been talking about healthcare and access to resources and management of resources. Yes. Do you think, in considering all of these factors, do you think that there's a strong case for free healthcare in Nigeria, access to family, especially with access to family planning, and even though there isn't I guess the scope is limited. But do you think that we can talk about free healthcare here in Nigeria?
The short answer is actually yes, and I would explain why. It is important that we should prioritize at this point as a country access to free family planning services and commodities for women. So there's a direct correlation. Of course, there's this triple bottom line in sustainability that we say people, planet, and profit. When you look at the extended version, the 5 P's, peace, prosperity, profit, planet, you begin to look at family planning as pivotal to achieving all of this. So if you want to manage manage poverty, you need to manage the population because of the scarce resources that we're having. If you want to have equitable access to education, you need to actually manage the number of children
the number of people that you're educating.
Right. So there's a central point that family planning actually plays here. If you want to talk about better gender representation at all levels, I give a typical example. I've often said that if there are 2 people that get a job, a male and a female, because of gender roles, the female will get pregnant, nurse the baby, nurse the child. If you check, if they're doing a 20-year dash, 10 years of that woman's life is going to be spent taking care and nursing children. If she's not careful, there's going to be a disproportionate movement.
Yeah, when it comes to career and profession.
Exactly. So it takes a bit of time for her to catch up. So that's 10 years of her life, and that's just 3 children, right? I'm just using 3 children with equally spaced interval of about 3 years. That's literally 10 years of her life gone.
And that's just 3 children.
That's just 3 children.
About 5 and 6
about 5 and 6 children, exactly.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about family planning, it then means that she's able to make that choice of saying, when do I want to get pregnant? First, my body is my right. And then, of course, with her spouse, decide, not just that they just get pregnant. I would say we're expecting a child because it's an accident that they've accepted, right? But there's nothing they can do about it because even going the other way, there's the religious implication, and there's the financial implication. So they would rather go with it. That there are also health implications to the woman as well.
Yeah.
So within that scope of that conversation, there's that space there. Now, if you then look at aspects where we speak about the risk pooling system, the idea of pool funds, when I talked about health insurance, right? If we're a nation of 200 million, plus 200 million people, like we rightly said from the beginning, and you have about 50 to 60% of us on some form of health insurance, look at the sheer amounts of funds that we have. Why not then give family planning
a bit, just a small section, a small chunk?
Today, Nigeria still is not meeting its quota for its contribution to family planning unmet needs. So we have a quota of about, is it $4 million, if I remember, or is it $40 million that we need to actually always put on ground for family planning unmet needs. And that's something we struggle with every year and, back to back. So that's something we need to prioritize as a nation. And, there's a lot of ways that would actually help. So think about that see what we've done with a lot of investments for HIV, and see what we've done with donor investment for, condoms in Nigeria. I did a research during the COVID, and it showed that it was only the condoms that was available beyond the last mile during the COVID. In fact, globally, UNFPA said that we were going to run out of condoms because of the rate of adoption and utilization of the condoms and that side. How do we get, gel insertion and the gel are available? How do we get all the
other ways,
ways available for people to be able to have access to? I should be able to work into a primary healthcare facility, and they will tell me about the options, and the options are actually available. They won't just present the option that is available based off of the distribution.
If you don't want to, I think there's so many other ways. Lines you can call.
Exactly.
Now we have like apps where
absolutely you can actually order.
You can order a test. You can order
exactly.
So we can also order these things. So I don't have to worry about.
But the thing would now be that I would then be able to. I already have my insurance number, so I don't have to pay out of pocket for it.
It's already there.
It's already covered for me. So it then creates a system where, like I said earlier, it unbundles an opportunity where the private sector person that is distributing or enabling distribution is also getting some value from it, and they know that there's already ready market because they're not having to wait for the person to make the decision based off out of pocket.
Right.
And those that want to buy out of pocket are also able to buy out of pocket because they have the capability to actually do that. So it creates an interesting market system where, you know, you have access, there's increased access, right? But with the increased access needs to come increased knowledge, right? So because whilst we're talking about accessibility, there's also awareness that needs to be created more about it. So, you know, I do know I've come across a lot of women, like I said earlier, that don't even have an understanding of all of the different methods of family planning. They just know a few. How do we get more people to know more about it? How do we get the market woman to understand it a lot better? How do we get
that
the
she
woman?
even has options.
She has options. Yeah. She
options.
doesn't just have to stay.
Yeah.
So that is empowering in itself.
Yeah.
How do we empower more people? So there is actually a place just beyond, you know, just providing free planning services. You should have that free planning commodity, because part of the service we talk about just the counseling, right? The commodity should the full length of the service, you know, for me to be able to receive the care, receive, you know, the commodities, and then, you know, receive follow-ups in case I have questions, you know,
issues,
a full length treatment,
Yeah.
you know, of managing that. So that's really my posture around that.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a bit amazing that when we started this series, just the amount of education that one is getting about things that one thought one knew about and one really didn't know anything. So I'm learning so much. So thank you so much for coming, Abiola. I really appreciate it.
It's been a great honor, and it's been wonderful to share.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's our show today. I'd like to say a big thank you to our principal partner, Worthy. We want to say a huge thank you to the Herbert Wigway Foundation for this beautiful space, and of course, Hasty Health Initiative. Until the next time, be safe and take care of yourself.